Tonight, a man is accused of impersonating a nurse at Scotland's largest hospital and repeatedly gaining access to the resuscitation and children's areas. We're live with the latest.
Also making the headlines, a growth in medical tourism. But is it worth the risk? We speak to a woman who travelled to Latvia for weight loss surgery.
Absolutely no regrets whatsoever. None whatsoever. This is going to be the best tool I've ever given myself to get to a point where I'm healthy again.
Businesses in Aire fear falling footfall since the station hotel fire will force them out of business.
I'm Kellyanne Woodland in Edinburgh.
And I'm John Mackay in Glasgow. This is the STV News at 6. Good evening. A man is facing trial accused of impersonating a nurse multiple times at Scotland's largest hospital. It's alleged he repeatedly gained access to the resuscitation and children's area of the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital in Glasgow and acted in a disorderly way.
The 28-year-old is now facing trial. The incidents prompted an alert notice from the NHS National Services counter-fraud team, and staff at the flagship hospital have been reminded to wear identification and to remain vigilant. Well, Ollie Dickinson is at the hospital for us tonight. So Ollie, what more can you tell us?
Well, what we know so far, Kellyanne, is that 28-year-old Lee Woods from Greenock will appear at Glasgow Sheriff Court in January of next year. There he'll face a charge that alleges that between March and July, on multiple occasions of this year, he wore an NHS uniform, a lanyard and a falsified identification badge claiming to be a charge nurse. Now, the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital behind me is Scotland's largest hospital. It has an adult and a children hospital, each with its own emergency department. And the charge alleges that whilst there, Mr. Woods went into the children's area of the hospital. It also alleges that he went into the resuscitation area, and that, by its very nature, is where some of the hospital's sickest patients are receiving life and death care.
And Ollie, why are we only hearing about this now?
Well, this came to light after an internal memo was sent to NHS staff on Friday, warning them to be vigilant and to report any suspicious activity to their managers. That memo, though, was sent almost 4 months after Wood's arrest. Now, NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, who run the hospital, have said they would like to assure members of the public that their on-site security teams work very hard to ensure the safety and security of all of their facilities for all who need to use them. And tonight, a spokesperson says that they've worked with the appropriate authorities since the incident.
All right, Ollie, live from the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital. Thank you very much. Now, most people know when it comes to losing weight, there is no easy fix. Surgery for those who are morbidly obese is one option, but long NHS waiting lists and a strict criteria mean this treatment is hard to access. One consequence of this is a growing number of patients who are deciding to pay for operations here or abroad.
Doctors fear without extensive research and the right post-operative care, people are putting themselves at risk. Despite warnings, this form of medical tourism is on the rise. In the first of two reports, our chief reporter Sharon Frew has spoken to one woman who says she has no regrets about her decision to have surgery in Latvia.
A yo-yo dieter since her teens, Ruth Graham felt she had to take radical action and couldn't afford to wait 5 years on an NHS list for bariatric surgery. Back in September, a flight was booked for Riga in Latvia, and her gastric bypass operation was days away.
I find it difficult to tell people what I'm getting because it's almost like admitting a failure to do something about it yourself. I'm diabetic, I've got problems with mobility with my knees. I've worked too hard in my life not to have a retirement, and all I could see for myself was a mobility scooter.
Here, weight loss surgery is usually only offered to someone with a body mass index of 40 and over, or if they meet certain criteria. With lengthy NHS waiting lists, the number seeking private, cheaper treatment abroad is on the increase.
I feel fine, I just want it done now.
Ruth paid £5,600 and travelled to one of the largest clinics in Eastern Europe. Before COVID, it treated 180 UK patients annually. Last year, it was 575. 20% were from Scotland.
Usually surgery is like a last resort for patients. And not only for patients, also for doctors. Obesity is not like a condition, it's a disease. In fact, it's a chronic progressive disease. It should be treated by professionals.
Following a number of deaths and rising cases of people returning with complications from countries including Turkey, the Foreign Office issued a warning earlier this year about the dangers of medical tourism. Ruth was well aware of other patients' bad experiences, but armed with research, still wanted to go ahead.
I heard a particularly bad one before I left, but this is going to sound really morbid, but the thought of living on like that was worse.
6 weeks after surgery with support from her GP, Ruth's weight has dropped from 16 stone to just under 14.
I've had no diabetes meds or insulin since before my operation, and my bloods came back and they were better than they were before I left. I got back about early hours of the morning on Thursday. My doctor phoned me on Thursday afternoon. By the end of that day I had the meds that I needed. My GP's been amazing. Absolutely amazing. And I know not everybody's been as lucky as that.
STV News spoke to another patient who lives just half an hour from Ruth, who also travelled to Latvia and had the same surgery on the same day. But when she returned home, her GP refused to provide any aftercare. Nationally, support varies. In Lanarkshire, this GP says he deals with 2 patients every month presenting with complications. To respond to this, his NHS board has issued new guidance.
These weight loss surgeries are a large abdominal surgery. We're seeing a lot of people that are having irreversible neurological damage because they've not been followed up with the correct advice from the surgical provider. We don't have, as GPs, the competencies to do post-operative management for a patient, and that's the bit where people struggle with at the moment. That's the bit where there's quite a lot of agitation between patients and GPs. There is a public health message that is going to come about this, that yes, it does work for a group of people that are fit and able, but for a large amount of people it's not going to be suitable and it's not the correct intervention at the right time.
Having paid for additional private nutritional support for the next year, Ruth is carefully limiting her food intake to 800 calories a day.
Absolutely no regrets whatsoever. None whatsoever. This is going to be the best tool I've ever given myself to get to a point where I'm healthy again.
The NHS will always provide emergency care if necessary, but doctors here say they currently have no idea how many people are opting for this radical step overseas and the potential demands from patients when this surgery goes wrong. Rising obesity and an increase in this form of medical tourism suggests this challenge will only deepen without greater education, regulation and national guidance. Sharon Frew, STV News.
And we'll hear what can go wrong with these types of surgery from a leading surgeon and a patient in a second report from Sharon tomorrow. Boris Johnson was clearly bamboozled by COVID scientific advice and was a weak and indecisive Prime Minister. That's what the UK COVID inquiry heard today after diary extracts from the former chief scientific advisor were published.
Sir Patrick Vallance also told the inquiry certain politicians, like former Health Secretary Matt Hancock, pressured them to change scientific advice, with Rishi Sunak suggesting it was about handling the scientists rather than handling the virus. Here's our political reporter, Laura Alderman.
During the pandemic, Sir Patrick Vallance had one of the most critical and senior roles in government. Making a speedy entrance to the UK COVID-19 inquiry today, diary extracts from the former chief scientific advisor were read out.
These were private thoughts, they were instant reflections from a day.
There's the antibodies.
One of those reflections being former Prime Minister Boris Johnson's apparent difficulties in understanding the science around coronavirus.
You say, my God, this is complicated. Models will not provide the answer. PM is clearly bamboozled. Was there a more serious problem with him than that which you describe in the witness statement? Well, I think I'm right in saying that the Prime Minister at the time gave up science when he was 15. And I think he'd be the first to admit it wasn't his forte, and that he did struggle with some of the concepts, and we did need to repeat them often.
Sir Patrick was quizzed on when the country should have locked down.
This was an occasion when I think it's clear that we should have gone earlier. And we had a huge influx from Spain, France and Italy over that half term and beyond, which meant that we probably had lost control.
He added that later in the year, when ministers wanted to lift COVID restrictions, his advice was deemed unpalatable and often not sought on policy issues, like the Eat Out to Help Out scheme in August 2020.
We didn't know about until it was announced, and I think our advice would have been very clear on that. Interaction between different households and people that you weren't living with in an enclosed environment with many others was a high-risk activity. That policy completely reversed it.
The inquiry heard how the then Chancellor, now Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, suggested it was about handling the scientists rather than handling the virus.
I think there's a WhatsApp exchange you've got where Matt Hancock asked me to change something, and I say no. We're not going to change our advice, because that's where the evidence bit comes in, that you've got to at least see that, even if you disagree with it and you don't want to do it.
Dominic Cummings says Rishi thinks just let people die and that's okay. And then this feels like a complete lack of leadership. Is that your comment at the end there?
Yes, I think so.
I mean, perhaps it's obvious. Again, tell us, is this one of your late night furious thinking, or is it something you would stand by now?
Well, it must have felt like a complete lack of leadership on that day, and reading it feels like quite a shambolic day.
This week, the inquiry will continue hearing from government's top COVID advisers, with Sir Chris Whitty due to speak tomorrow. Laura Alderman, STV News.
To other stories, and detectives investigating an attempted murder in Bearsden are appealing for information. Around 5 o'clock yesterday morning, police were called to reports of a disturbance after an Audi Q7 was deliberately driven at a man and crashed into a premises on Spey Road. There were no reports of any injuries. A 40-year-old man has been arrested and charged in connection with the disturbance. The driver and a passenger of the Audi fled the scene.
More than 4,700 applications for permits to offer short-term lets have been submitted after a licensing scheme was introduced in Scotland, but less than 300 of those are in Edinburgh and Glasgow. The figures, which cover to the end of June, show just under half were still awaiting a decision, and 45% of applications had been granted.
A new payment could help unpaid carers in Scotland stay in education. It's expected 80,000 people will benefit from the £76 a week carer support payment once it's rolled out across the country by next autumn.
When you're an unpaid carer, your CV's empty and there's nothing on it, and it doesn't matter what skills you achieve through your caring role, they're never recognised. So this new payment is going to allow me to actually go ahead and look to the future and start my degree course.
And Oxfam is urging the First Minister to use the upcoming Scottish budget to implement measures to make the biggest and richest polluters pay for their damaging carbon footprint. A report released by the charity claimed that the richest households in Scotland emit 4 times more than the poorest.
December will be here in just 11 days' time, but we don't have to wait that long for the prospect of some colder temperatures. Larger numbers of us, though, will be thinking twice before cranking up the heating.
Citizens Advice Scotland says the cost of energy is the #1 financial concern for more than 2 million of us. Here's our senior reporter, Gordon Cree.
If I could get another rain and it would be good.
This activity group, run by the Ladywell Neighbourhood Network in Livingston, brings together older people every Monday afternoon. And for many, it plays an important role against isolation, as well as helping manage the cost of energy.
They provide social space, but also a warm space. So if you can come out to somewhere like this in the afternoon, that's the afternoon you haven't got to have your heating on.
On Thursday, the regulator Ofgem will announce the price cap for winter. The cost of a unit of gas or electricity is expected to rise by around 5%.
What we don't know yet is how harsh a winter lies ahead. And because ultimately how much you pay for energy comes down to how much you use, colder weather means bigger bills.
When it comes to energy bills, many of us will be worried this winter. Whether it's turning the heating off, going somewhere warm for a heat, or cutting back on treats for the kids, people are making tough choices.
Citizens Advice Scotland says research has found almost half of us say the cost of energy is our biggest financial concern this winter.
People who saw a gain from our energy advice are over £400 better off.
It's always worth checking to make sure you're on the best deal, particularly because for some there's no option but to keep the temperature up.
I've got arthritis, so I need heat. So I'll suffer it for so long now. I'll put the cardigan on, and if it's still cold, I'll go and go see heat.
Others, though, are trying to avoid heating the whole house.
I've also bought a throw. It's electric, and you can just put it over yourself. And it's 1 pence an hour. And after 2 hours, it switches itself off, just in case you fall asleep, I suppose.
While energy prices are lower than a year ago, they're still well above where they were before the cost of living crisis began. And that means a big freeze could still bite hard. Gordon Cree, STV News, Livingston.
Rishi Sunak has signalled that tax cuts are on the way when the Chancellor delivers the autumn statements to MPs in the House of Commons on Wednesday.
The Prime Minister has been under pressure from his own party to set out plans to cut taxes ahead of a general election expected next year. For the latest, we go to our Westminster correspondent, Paris Goutsianis.
Well, Rishi Sunak's first job when he took power was cleaning up the economic mess left by Liz Truss. That's why he's not delivered on a pledge to cut taxes. But with an election looming and a deeply unhappy party, today the Prime Minister announced tax cuts are coming.
So now that inflation is halved and our growth is stronger, meaning revenues are higher, we can begin the next phase and turn our attention to cutting tax. We will do this in a serious, responsible way, based on fiscal rules to deliver sound money and alongside the independent forecast of the Office of Budget Responsibility. And we can't do everything all at once. It will take discipline, and we need to prioritise. But over time, we can and we will cut taxes.
So, Paris, what tax cuts are being considered?
Well, there's been a lot of talk about cutting inheritance tax, which is only paid by the wealthiest 4%. But politically, that's difficult to do with an election coming up. Then there's income tax. Now, both the tax rates and the bands that determine who pays how much, those are devolved. So any cuts announced by Westminster, those would put political pressure on the SNP Finance Secretary, Shona Robeson, when she stands up to deliver the Scottish budget next month. And finally, there's national insurance and VAT, which are partly paid by businesses. Cutting those would have a direct impact on pay packets and small businesses in Scotland.
And is it known how any tax cuts would be paid for?
Well, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has rummaged up some spare cash thanks to the UK not slipping into recession this year. But because economic growth is expected to be flat next year, there isn't much room for manoeuvre. That's why there's also talk of increasing either pensions or benefits by less than the rate of inflation. That means the worst off could see their incomes fall even further behind the cost of living. Another tough call in an election year. What Rishi Sunak says he won't do is increase borrowing. He attacked Labour and his opponents in the Conservative Party for suggesting further tax cuts. We'll find out the detail on Wednesday. If the Chancellor doesn't announce it, then the fine print in the autumn statement will.
Paris at Westminster, thank you. 2 regeneration projects in the west of Scotland are to receive almost £30 million from the UK government's Levelling Up Fund. Drumchapel Town Centre will benefit from £15 million to improve retail and connectivity. Meanwhile, South Lanarkshire will get funds to develop the Shawfield Business District and Polmadie Burn. Business owners in Aire say they're fearful they'll need to shut up shop if footfall in the area doesn't improve. Retailers say they've suffered since Station Hotel went on fire. No trains have run through the station since September and crucial roads have closed. South Ayrshire Council say they're working on measures to lessen the impact for local businesses, as Caitlin Hutchison reports.
No trains have passed through Aire since September after a fire gutted the Station Hotel. But it's done more than devastate this derelict building. Small business owners throughout the town say they're now fighting to survive the winter.
The footfall's down about 80% and we're really on our last legs in the shops. We need to get the Aire train station up and working. We need to get the roads open. This is coming up to our Christmas period. If we get through the Christmas period, great. If we don't, we're looking at closing up.
And it's the same story up and down this street.
We are quite far away from the station at the best of times, so people not getting to even get into Aire and walking all the way along the high street, we've really been affected with the lack of footfall.
Closures are expected to last until around the 10th of January as safety works continue. But the council says it's a complicated site, throwing up issues on a daily basis.
Well, at some point they will have to demolish, but somebody's making the decision not to do it and it's causing mayhem in the town. Ask any retailer.
But that's not all that's worrying them. Retailers are concerned that planned works that would see roads like these ripped up as part of a regeneration project, widening pavements and installing bus and cycle lanes could provide a fatal blow to businesses at a time when they're already suffering.
That would be devastation for this wee street. It's a lot of family-run businesses and they don't have the backing of the corporate to come and say, here you go, we'll help you out until such times. You just don't have it. Like they're trying to make it all these bike lanes, etc., which is all very well for the environment. But as I say, I can't imagine somebody coming for a wedding dress and putting it in the back of a push bike. You're just going to cut our throats.
It's a project, once it starts, is a 2-year project with all the disruption that a project like that could potentially bring. So I don't know what support the council plan to put in place to help us retailers trade through that difficult period.
In response to the recent disruption, South Ayrshire Council said they're working to make grants available for those most impacted in the immediate area and have announced plans to entice more people into the town over the festive period with weekend events and free parking. But many fear that's not going to be enough to save what could be a thriving shopping hub.
It's a fab street. It's got tons of history in the Aire. If you've got an asset like this, then I think you've got one of those sort of unique things that we should be looking to promote more.
We've got so much to offer, but it's just letting people know, just please make the effort and come down to Newmarket Street because there are so many other businesses here.
Caitlin Hutchison, STV News, Aire.
OK, it's time to find out how the weather has in store. Here's Philip.
A spell of sea air will be followed by a strong chance of you have to try these. TUI sponsors STV Weather.
Hello and a very good evening to you. Well, over the past few days you may have read some of the headlines saying that we're expecting snow by the end of this week, and that is true to an extent, but most of that snow will be falling on higher ground and down to sea level, but only on the Northern Isles. Elsewhere though, that snow won't be widespread, certainly not down here through central and southern parts. Now as we head through this evening and overnight, we're continuing to see some showers spreading down eastern coastal areas. Once those fizzle out though, for many of us it's turning dry overnight. We'll see plenty of clear skies. So in rural parts we could see a touch of frost forming, temperatures getting below freezing. So for tomorrow morning it will be a chilly but a bright start to the day. We've got a ridge of high pressure building in from the south and west, so that's giving us settled conditions. It will remain dry through much of the afternoon and bright. There is a lot of high level cloud around though, so a lot of the sunshine will be feeling quite hazy. Temperatures reaching highs around 10 or 11 across the very far west where there is milder air, but for many of us temperatures struggling to reach higher than 6 or 7. Looking ahead to Wednesday now, this is when things turn a lot wetter and windier. We've got tightly packed isobars across the country. We could be seeing gusts through the central belt of between 40 and 45 miles per hour. We've also got this cold front moving in, bringing with it a band of rain, with temperatures reaching highs of 12. Bye-bye.
TUI sponsors STV Weather.
And that is all from us this evening, but we will of course be back tomorrow at 6.
Some of us still grafting on. I'll be here at Scotland Tonight at 10:40. See you then. Have a good night.
Good night.